Still on that same matter, we have with us here Colonel Francis Okosun, who is a retired military officer and security consultant here in our studio. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you. Well, a number of things have been spoken about this, and but you know, I'd like to take you up on something slightly different on the same issue, especially because the attack both in Taraba and Sokoto are around border communities. So the first question that comes to my mind is, what happened to all of our border control agencies, like customs, immigration?
Well, this all boils down to a question of governance. We became independent in 1960, and the entire country was the responsibility of government. If in 2021 we're still talking about porosity of borders, we're still talking about inability to secure ground, territory, or terrain, then we are accepting that things have not been done properly. Now, the Yoruba say, Olokpa Bode, that is the border protectors. These are the customs and immigration. To some extent, the police. If you have this sort of situation, it simply states or says or explains or betrays the fact that what ought to be done has not been done.
Well, that is the situation. I mean, listening to the governor of Taraba State, when we engaged him on another of our programs, he was saying that, well, the immigration officers were there, but then they were outgunned and out-armed, so to speak, and they did the little they could do. But after, when the other side came with heavier firepower, they had to run for their own lives. And when you speak about governance, I'm wondering specifically what you're talking about here. Is it that we have completely ignored what we are supposed to do to engage our borders, or we are not even speaking to the border communities in the language by which they would themselves take ownership of the Nigerian nation as theirs?
To a large extent, what ought to be done has not been done.
So what are these things?
Border protection. Now, I listened to Governor Ishaku talk about the thinness of the immigration elements on the ground in Taraba. And I think that replicates itself all over the place. Now, you would have in strength customs and immigration at border locations where such border locations are, for want of a better word, where they are attractive. Ilela, Seme, Idiroko, the one and the Calabar axis, those areas would be attractive for them to deploy in strength. But take a place like Manga, for example. From what the governor was saying, it was just a very, very thin deployment. And if you put less than 10 men in that post, it's not an attractive post where you deploy so many, where people would want to be posted to. So when you have this kind of skirmish, as we had there, of course, they will be overpowered, and when that happens, the people run for dear life. So what I'm saying, in effect, is that if you had had a well-thought-out contingency plan to man these locations in strength, even if not manning them by human resource, there could be other technical resources that could be deployed in such areas.
Such as?
Well, I'm not in the immigration, but there could be technical resources that you deploy there for early warning. And if you have such early warning, you can have a report back system where you can have a fallback system, and then you can have replenishment of support.
Well, it sounds to me that, I mean, from what you are saying, it would seem like, we have failed our people because, according to the governor, a good number of people have died, 43 at the last count, if memory serves right. And it's about the same number you have, a good number of people in Taraba, but it's about 43 or so in Sokoto State. And one is wondering, if we continue to, and this is not the first time, especially in Sokoto State, you heard in the previous communication
Yes.
as well, in the northwest, in the north central, even in the northeast, one is wondering if we are, for a long time, as my colleague said in the previous interview, for quite a while we haven't had this kind of this kind of thing happen. You know, these attacks seem to have kind of tapered down. But then it would seem like there is a resurgence now, failing which, if we do not do anything, it would seem like we're just beginning to scratch the surface. At what point, in your opinion, do you think we dropped the ball, or you think we never even picked up the ball?
First, let me say, I will not characterize it as failing the people. Rather, it is that we've not been doing things right. We've not been doing things the way we ought to do them. And so we are embarrassed ever so often. I mean, this is an embarrassment because what ought to be done was not done. What am I talking about? Every entry point should be known. Every entry point should be and must be protected in some form, in some reckonable and reasonable form. The people expect from their government a measure of protection, and they're not getting it. They're not getting it. Not only in Manga, in so many other locations, they're not getting it. So until you determine to do the right things, you are going to be having this kind of embarrassments cropping up.
Is there, can we also assume failure of intelligence in either case? One of the one in Taraba, for instance, I mean, the general that we spoke with us earlier also talked about some diplomatic intervention necessary. If we say, the governor of Taraba State, whom you also listened to, said that no one knew that this was going to happen. Is it possible that such an attack would happen on a country, on our territorial integrity, and we would not be aware at all?
Okay, I would want to sound like a crack record again. Nigeria is made up of 774 local governments. And to each local government is assigned elements of the Department of State Service. To each local government is assigned elements of the Nigeria Police. These people are supposed to be on ground. These people are supposed to give you information processed by the relevant agencies or departments. If you had a police presence in that part of, and I'm sure that place must come under the command of some police commissioner, some area commander, or some DPO. So if you had such elements on ground there, how come, therefore, that they didn't read indicators? How come, therefore, these indicators were not interpreted? So, and you have, this is a situation that involves my country and another country. And in Yaoundé, I'm sure you have elements of the National Intelligence Agency. This is a strategic matter, for crying out loud. So, is there not a desk officer there who is responsible for that swath of territory? What has he done? What has he been doing? What was he doing? So there are questions that must be asked before we can apportion blames. If you ask me, if you put me in a position of authority today, I'll summon the DGNI and say, come on, let me have your desk officer. Let me have his report, back reports for the past 6 months. Let's see if there are any pointers to this likelihood, this thing that happened. If you do such things, if you carry out such probes, and I use this loosely, then we'll be seeing things done differently and much more purposefully. So if you had that sort of a thing happen in Manga, and you have not sought to find out from those who should know, then we'll sit down here and just be wasting our time.
Well, Colonel, the Constitution says explicitly security and welfare of the people shall be the primary responsibility of government.
Absolutely.
From what we have seen now, it would seem like all the people, for all the people who have died in these two communities that we're talking about today, government hasn't done its bit well. And from what you're saying, questions should be asked from specific agencies of government. One can only hope then that that will be done. Are you optimistic?
I'm old enough to know that inquiries in this country have not quite been useful. Again, you set up an inquiry and all the hula baloo and all the noise and all the dust is raised, and soon after that, nothing is heard. But here, I would underscore the fact that the frontline establishments or organizations that are meant to take responsibility are asked to do their job. They are asked to do their job. Now look at the poor chaps, the immigration, the customs, and the soldiers who were sent to go, including your staff, who said, somebody said they were on the road and on water for over 7 hours. Well, if you had layered system, you would not have had to go that distance to go get information that could have been fed routinely. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not speaking in parables, am I?
Well, maybe to those who really do have an understanding of this, and the issues have been quite significant. And now there are those who are raising this as some form of resurgence, especially because issues concerning Ambazonia, which is the southern Cameroon territory, has been a long time coming, so to speak. One is just hoping that, as we have discussed, the government will do the needful. But just one more issue before we let you go. Just yesterday, we heard this report that there was an attack again on Abuja-Kaduna Highway, and talking about another resurgence of sorts. I recall that it was in January that it was celebrated that 300 female soldiers were dispatched to Abuja-Kaduna Highway, and it seemed like when that happened, everything else went quiet. We hadn't been hearing that, for a long time. A particular community, I do not particularly remember that community now, is said to be notorious for this kind of activities, the banditry on the Abuja-Kaduna Highway. It's at this very location that the military was said to have set up a helipad just to at least try to reduce, if not eradicate, cases of attacks in that community, on that road, especially in that area. Please, is there anything that we stopped doing or that we decided not to do anymore that made this to research?
Francis Okosun cannot tell you why that particular incident came about. But I can tell you for free that when you fight insurgents or bandits or this kind of asymmetrical thing, it's not a cut and dry solution. You can find a cut and dry solution too. It's in the nature of conflicts that you have lows and highs, that you have victories and setbacks. If it happened, we'll learn from them. I will learn from such and try to prevent it in the future. You would always have casualties in battle. You would always have defeats. You will always have victories. You see, we should not arrogate to our fighting forces infallibility or invincibility. These are people who are susceptible to mistakes, missteps, and so on.
Well, if it is possible to not have casualties that are unarmed, I think that's really the goal. If, as we said earlier, the responsibility of government is to protect lives and property. So if lives are not protected, we definitely have to.
Can I get casualties that are unarmed, did you say?
I mean, you talked about the fact that, there will always be casualties, but then nobody wants people who woke up in the morning
Oh.
with no intention to
Oh.
die,
Oh.
you know, finding themselves in the situations that we have had in these three communities.
It's regrettable, no
Most
doubt.
certainly.
Yeah.
Well, as we always say here, government has its job cut out. We have to thank you very much for your time this morning.
pleasure.
Colonel Francis Okosun is a retired military officer and security consultant. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you so much.
Our Sunrise is back. Sunrise Daily is back in just a moment to take on another issue. Do stay with us.